Dove is recognized for 60 minutes as the designee of the minority leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and include any extraneous material on the subject of this special order.
Without objection.
It is with great honor that I rise today to co-anchor this Congressional Black Caucus Special Order Hour along with my distinguished colleague from the great state of Ohio, Representative Shontel Brown, who hopefully will be joining us, but she is, along with so many of our other colleagues, in her committee hearing, trying to figure out if Republicans will stand up with the American people and vote down so many of the disastrous proposals that are being brought up in these various committees as it relates to the reconciliation bill. So, for the next 60 minutes, members of the CBC have an opportunity to speak directly to the American people, directly to you, on the Republicans' disastrous reconciliation package. This is an issue of great importance, of utmost importance, of perilous importance, not just to the Congressional Black Caucus, but to everyone, and hopefully not just members of the Congress who are Democrats, but hopefully Republican members will also stand up with and for the American people and vote down some of this nonsense that is going to be coming before all of us in our committees. But at the very least, let's not be silent. And that is why the Congressional Black Caucus is here tonight. Mr. Speaker, House Republicans on the Ways and Means Committee just released text. This is this one big, beautiful bill. This is this 386-page manifesto that killed trees and trees and trees. And I have to tell you, Mr. Speaker, there are only 2 words in that phrase that are accurate. This is a bill, and it is big, but it is not beautiful. It is a backstabbing bill because all of the items in this bill, in these 386 pages, are about how this administration is going to backstab the American people. And it's not going to feel good. Unlike the OJ song, The Backstabbers, okay? This doesn't have a good melody. This is about cutting Medicaid and Medicare and Social Security and benefits for veterans. This is about killing young people and seniors and those who are disabled. This is about cutting important critical services for the American people to give tax credits to billionaires. A lot of B's in this statement that I said, none of them very good. And let me be very clear, Republicans have barely made any attempts to support working families. Instead, they have written an economic love letter to people like Elon Musk. This is a 386-page love letter to Elon Musk. Republicans have been running from the truth. All they want, okay, they have been silent, all they want, but the truth is in the eyes of this administration. Americans don't need health care, but this administration somehow needs a $400 million plane gifted to them from the Saudi government. Americans don't need SNAP assistance, but this administration and all of his billionaire buddies need millions in tax write-offs. Mr. Speaker, how are my constituents supposed to live? How are your constituents supposed to live? How are any of our constituents supposed to pull themselves up by those ridiculous bootstraps that people like to talk about when this administration and the House majority are actually not just taking away their boots, but taking away the leather and the rubber and the soles and the labor that would be used to even make these boots. And we are going to be spending the next hour talking about all of that. But right now, Mr. Speaker, I want to yield to my very good friend from the great state of Maryland, Representative Glenn Ivey.
I thank the gentlelady for yielding. And it's an honor to be here on behalf of the Congressional Black Caucus to address these issues and speak to these issues because they're so timely. And there's new developments that come every day with these that, keep us guessing as to what the Trump administration is going to do from one moment to the next. I'm going to talk about this plane from Qatar towards the end, but I did want to speak today, Mr. Speaker, about my deep concern about the appropriations and budget processes as established by the Constitution, because they're broken. I rise out of deep concern for our institution, our responsibilities, and for the American people who elected us to make decisions. The continuing resolutions that we've been passing are temporary stopgaps, but they've become the norm. And it's not just a failure of a process, it's a failure of President Trump's leadership and House Republican leadership. Trump's economic failures include trying to make his tax cuts permanent, the DOGE cuts, and the irresponsibility of the tariff packages, which thank goodness he backed away from that a few days ago with respect to cutting a deal with China. But that's only for 90 days. And the challenge of the erratic and illegal behavior he's been exhibiting is that it really puts companies in a very difficult spot. Companies have to make decisions not just moment to moment, as apparently President Trump does, but over months, sometimes years, especially if they're going to make major decisions about something like, say, investing to build a new plant, because that can cost millions or even billions of dollars. And so when he does things like he puts up 130-something% in tariffs against one of the main trading partners of the United States, like China, it creates a major problem for companies who do trade with China, who get their materials or send their finished products to China. And many of those are American small businesses, and we've seen and heard from many of those over the past couple of days. Some are toy manufacturers that I've been listening to as they talk about what's happened to their companies on the radio, and they're concerned about what might happen for them at the key time of year for their businesses, which would be the Christmas holidays. But the Trump administration didn't pay any attention to that. In fact, he just moved forward with the tariff cuts, or the tariffs that he put in place, not just against China, not just against our adversaries, but against allies like Canada and Mexico, France, Germany, and other countries. And it's been devastating to the American economy and businesses across the country. He ran for election telling the American people that he was going to make their economic lives better, that he was going to help them financially be better off than they were under the Biden administration. But it's clear in the first 6 months of what he's been doing that he's not putting money in their pockets, he's taking it out. And I think it's critical for us to make sure we understand fully what's going on here with respect to the packages that they're trying to move. He's trying to do it mainly through executive order. He's been unable to move major pieces of legislation through the House, and House leadership hasn't pressed him to do it, even though we're supposed to be doing these things through the appropriations process. Matter of fact, the Constitution gave us the obligation to move these bills through the appropriations process, but the Republican leadership in the House has failed to do that. And the failure to pass these appropriations bills has led to things like federal workers. They're being forced out of their positions. Some of them are being concerned about whether their paychecks are going to come. Small businesses, as we just mentioned a moment ago, especially those that are relying on government contracts, are having trouble making payroll. And in some of those instances, they've already done the work that they're supposed to get paid for. But the Trump administration has done two things. One is it's withdrawn contracts, but it's also, even though they performed the work, refused to make the payments and force some of these companies to shut down and fire some of their employees, even though they already did the work. And we're also going to have challenges, I think, too, with respect to communities who've been hit by major disasters. Unfortunately, I just saw, while we were waiting to start this process a few minutes ago, we had 3 major natural disasters today across the country. But FEMA's under attack, and the funding is being cut. With respect to reconciliation, as we just talked about a moment ago, the $881 billion in cuts to Medicaid is a shocking development. We know that what that could mean for communities across the country is that hospitals have to shut down, medical treatment facilities might have to be closed, people who perform medical services like doctors and nurses might not be available. And certainly in urban areas and suburban areas like mine, there's going to be a major impact from that. But in red states and rural districts as well. I just heard a report on the radio last week. It was talking about a district in a rural area where their hospital runs, I think it said 70% of their funding comes through Medicaid in one way or another. And if these cuts are made, that hospital's going to have to close. And if that hospital closes, it creates essentially a medical desert going 200 miles each way. So the next time you have a serious car accident in that area, they're going to have a tough time getting people to the care that they need. Or any kind of medical emergency, say perhaps from a complication in a birth scenario, or basic day-to-day medical services, they're going to have to drive hundreds of miles in some instances just to go see a doctor. With respect to the impoundment issue, I want to raise that too, because the Trump administration has started making the argument that even though money's been appropriated, they don't have to spend it. And the reason they're trying to do that is because they want to take control away from Congress, the power of the purse that was given to Congress through the Constitution, and take control of that themselves. And they want to do that so they marginalize Congress and make the spending decisions that they want to make. And we saw that with the $1.6 trillion that the Trump administration decided how to spend that, because we didn't pass a regular appropriation set of bills. We had to do it through the continuing resolution. It left them discretion that I don't think that they should have. And I got to say, I'm concerned about the way he's used his discretion in some of these processes. Some of the budget cuts that they've made, for example, VOCA, Victims of Crime Act is what that stands for. Cutting grants to help pick people who are victims of crime. Why would he take a step like that? Violence Against Women Act, VAWA. That's to help women who are surviving sexual assault or domestic violence. Why would you cut a program like that? We cut USAID programs that one of our colleagues referenced earlier about how that has had a positive impact on the starvation issues, the USAID efforts. But they're cutting programs that's going to lead to, I saw one estimate, 1.6 million people will die over the next year based on these cuts that he's making right now to foreign aid. We stopped funding AmeriCorps, which means less teachers in areas that are in desperate need of teaching assistants. We've got a lot of schools out there who are short on full-time teachers, certainly short on full-time certified teachers. Making cuts to AmeriCorps just exacerbates the problems. Cutting rental subsidies. That means that low-income families who have trouble keeping a roof over their head, the Trump administration is going to make it even harder for them to do that. Why would we take that step? And how is that consistent with the promise that he made to help American people who needed the help the most? Cuts to mental health services. We've got kids who are struggling in school. They're bullied sometimes. We've got some scenarios where you have serious violence attacks in the schools. And it might be a mass shooting from a gun situation. It might be something less serious than that. But we've got kids that need assistance with their mental health challenges across the country, and making cuts to those sorts of programs only makes it harder for these kids to survive and get through the school process. Cuts to NIH. Now, I know he had frankly, a vendetta essentially against Mr. Fauci, Dr. Fauci. And he's taking that out on many of the health institutions like the NIH. But at the end of the day, it's clear that the NIH has been and continues to be, hopefully at least, if they can survive these cuts, one of the premier institutions that do medical research that makes a difference here in the United States and around the world. Medical research on cancer. I'm a cancer survivor. It's important to folks like me, and there's a lot of folks who are cancer survivors, and the only reason we're still here is because of the medical advances that were made at places like NIH based on research that was done using government funding. That's how these things happen. Alzheimer's is another one. My father died from Alzheimer's. It's one of the most horrific diseases you can possibly imagine. You would never even wish it on your worst enemy. It's hard to even explain how tragic it is to watch a human being slide from being the full person that they were into something ravaged by Alzheimer's. They cut funding for clinical trials for Alzheimer's at NIH. And the thing about clinical trials you need to remember, it's not like an off switch. You don't just flick it on and off and it comes right back. If you shut down a clinical trial, you might have to start that all the way from scratch. And in some instances, the research and the projects that have been going forward under that have taken years. So he's setting that back years, months. Why? Why would he do that? And then the cuts to grants to help people who want to go into these science fields. You know, the United States, certainly in the last 50 years and in the post-war era, has been the premier nation with respect to science and technology and innovation. That's how we got Apple, that's how we got Microsoft, that's why we have quantum computing. All of those fantastic innovations and giant steps forward came from the United States, in part because of the research that was funded, in part, by the federal government. And the people who developed many of those advances got their training, paid for their college, paid for their PhDs using funding that helped them get through school. They wouldn't have been able to pay for it otherwise. Yet the Trump administration is making cuts not just to those programs, but also to the grants and funding that help those people get through. And to add insult to injury, the personal attacks on research institutions like Harvard, which has been a source of some of the best and talented, the best and the brightest that have taken leadership in these fields, he's making threats to undermine those institutions and those universities, just out of personal venom. It makes absolutely no sense. It's damaging to the United States. It undermines our leadership in science and technology in the world. It's almost like he says it's America first, but sometimes it feels like China first. Sometimes it feels like he's actually trying to help the Communist China Party leadership surge ahead of the United States in its leadership role in science and technology. And then $40 million in cuts for election security. Now, I know he still says he wins the 2020 election. Okay, fine. But, one of the things that we can all agree on for sure is that we know the Russians and the Chinese, and in some instances, Iran and terrorist organizations around the country, or around the world, are making efforts to influence our election with misinformation and disinformation and the like. Why would we ever make our elections more vulnerable to those kinds of attacks by cutting the funding that helps defend against it? I'll stop with this on the plane. When I first saw that on the news, I thought it was a joke. I thought it was like they were playing a clip from Saturday Night Live or something. I never imagined that the Trump administration or the Trump family would even consider taking a $400 million plane from a country like Qatar. Not exactly an adversary country, but certainly not an ally country. And even if they were, it's a foreign country. And the reason the Emoluments Clause was put in place in the Constitution was to make sure that presidents of the United States of America, whether it's number 1 or number 47, are not tempted or tested with these kinds of essentially bribes to try and get them to lean and issue support for their countries in making decisions. We want to make sure we have people like the President of the United States, not tested by the money, not tempted by the money, but always making the decisions for the best possible reasons in the best interest of the United States. But here we have $400 billion plane, and apparently he'll eventually own it personally. Now, tell me why that's beneficial for the country. creates conflicts of interest, and then some, because we have all of these issues with Qatar, including the negotiations with the Gaza conflict. How is this going to be beneficial to the United States to create these levels of conflicts? Even if he could rise above them, the appearance of the conflicts is ridiculous. It's astonishing, and it's unacceptable. The National Review, not exactly a liberal rag, not exactly a liberal bastion, said the swamp is under new ownership. So much for the commitments that he made to the American people when he first ran and when he ran again to so-called clean up the swamp. Here we are. It violates the Constitution. I think on its face, he should know better. And I'm sure that everybody in the Congress, sometimes he needs guardrails. Okay, he always needs guardrails. This is the moment we've got to make sure we stand up and put the guardrails in place. So to my colleagues here in Congress, let's get back to work. Let's stand up and address this issue, the conflicts of interest with the plane. Let's make it clear that we unanimously oppose him taking the plane, certainly on the behalf of the United States, and certainly in his personal capacity, that we unanimously want to move forward with a budget that's fair and reasonable and helps the American people, not taking $881 billion out of their pockets, out of the pockets of kids, out of the pockets of seniors, out of the pockets of the disabled, the people who need it the most. We've got to make sure that when this budget process is done, we're protecting the people who need it the most. Right now, it looks like we're taking from the most vulnerable to give to the most wealthy, like Elon Musk and his allies. We've got to reverse that process. And so I want to commend the gentlelady for pulling this together, my colleagues with the Congressional Black Caucus, my colleagues in the Democratic Caucus, and hopefully colleagues in the Republican Caucus who will stand up and say, we can't do this, we cannot cross these lines. The plane is over the line, the $881 billion in cuts to Medicaid's over the line, the no more appropriations bills, that's over the line. Let's get back to work. Let's engage in clear and proper oversight, and let's address these problems and do the work that helps the American people. And with that, I yield back to my colleague.
Thank you, Representative Ivey from the great state of Maryland, for keeping it real and really underscoring the challenges that are in front of us as Americans, and really articulating why courage, backbone, just basic common sense are so needed right now in these perilous times. And why are these times perilous? These times are perilous because in Congress we are in the process of debating and trying to pass this reconciliation bill. And people might be saying, well, what is it? Well, it is essentially a budget. And in each of the committees, discussions are had about where to spend and where to cut. And this House majority has been given marching orders. And the marching orders are to cut as much as possible. Cut until the American people bleed. And the only folks who will be able to afford Band-Aids to prevent them from bleeding to death will be the richest of the rich. And everyone else, you'll have to fend for yourself. And so in each of these committees on which we sit, we are debating cuts that will hurt this economy, that will hurt constituents, that will hurt American businesses, that will hurt our standing in the world. And this is not a red or blue discussion. This is not even a Black Caucus or other caucus discussion. This is about what is at risk, who is at danger, who is being put at risk by this administration, and quite frankly, by the silence coming from this House majority. So tonight and later on this week, Ag Energy and Commerce, and the Ways and Means Committees are meeting. And they've been meeting earlier today, and they are meeting they're also continuing to meet right now. And the challenge is, meeting this late in the evening allows them to do dirty business, allows them to vote on bills and amendments that will hurt the American people, without the benefit of having the news being able to report on it before people go to bed. So it's almost like these dirty deeds will be happening at night when no one can see or hear what's going on. And so maybe we are spending our time talking about this $400 million bribe that was just given to this administration, when we should be talking about all of the cuts that are going to be coming from these committees. With reconciliation, Republicans want all the cuts, but they do not want the political consequences. And so that is why we are here tonight talking about what those consequences will be, talking about what's in these reconciliation bills, what's in this package, because we don't want anyone to get political amnesia. We don't want anyone to forget when they are hurting, when they're trying to pay a bill, when they're trying to get gas, when they're trying to buy eggs, when they're trying to buy a home, when they're looking for a job, when they're trying to bury a loved one, why it is so hard to do any of those things, why the costs are so high. We're going to continue to remind the American people why all of those costs are going to be so high. And it is because of the cuts that are coming in this reconciliation bill, cuts that Republicans could have stopped, but they have been too silent. Last week, we were here and we had hearings in foreign affairs, in judiciary, in small business, in veterans, on natural resources, in those committees and in others. And I don't know if many of these discussions or outcomes from these committees have made it into the news cycle. So folks don't know what really happened in those committees. But I'm going to say, in those committees, we talked about cutting State Department by close to 50%, terminating workers in the State Department, finalizing the shuttering of USAID. And people might say, well, what is USAID? Well, part of what USAID does is contract with American farmers. That farmers have contracts with USAID. USAID buys their product and then uses it. And all of those contracts have stopped because Republicans are looking for ways to fill the gap, the big gap, the chasm that has been made by these tax cuts going to billionaires. They've done so much at the State Department that they've even fired the people who are responsible for purchasing the tickets to bring Americans home from all of their missions around the world. So you have Americans who are stuck in countries around the world, separated from their families, unable to get home because the ticket agency in State Department has been shut down. In judiciary, we talked about billions of dollars going to ICE for bonuses to buy computers and cars and deporting Americans and allowing January 6ers to be hired to work for the federal government. People who came in here trying to bludgeon the Capitol Police and the people who work in this very institution. And in that committee, Republicans voted to allow them to work for the federal government and have the authority to go after other Americans. In the Natural Resources Committee, they passed a bill that would allow us to sell federal land, land that we all enjoy, parks, recreational services, forests. I want the people in my life, the little people in my world, to be able to go and visit a natural reserve or to go to one of our national parks and monuments and see that it's still owned by the United States, that we haven't sold it to some corporation or, God forbid, some other country, someone with the highest bid. And we're selling that land, and the proceeds are going into the coffers because, remember, we have to cover the $4.5 trillion gap that House Republicans made because they want to give tax cuts to the wealthiest of the wealthy. And so what else does that mean? It means that Republicans plan to cut $900 billion to Medicaid, kicking 8.7 million people off of Medicaid over the next 10 years. And the plan calls for new requirements for beneficiaries, for those who are on Medicaid, work requirements. And you say, well, yeah, I don't have a problem with people going to work, but they're also saying we want seniors, we want folks who are disabled, we want the elderly, we want those folks to be schlepping down the street trying to find a job in this market, of course, when it's actually hard to find employment. And they've been saying, well, you know, you can make these cuts because there are not even that many people on Medicaid. There are these people who are 150 years old or 130 years old, or they've been dead for 4 years, and they're on Medicaid. Well, the reality is that so many of us have constituents who are dependent on Medicaid and Medicare and Social Security that are going to be devastated because of these cuts. In California, there are 470,000 people on Medicaid, and they are going to be at risk of losing their care because of what the Republican budget plans to do. This is 140,000 children under the age of 19 and 40,000 seniors over the age of 65 just in my district. And I'm going to say it again. My district has the 4th highest Medicaid enrollee numbers in the country. California has 7 of the 10th highest Medicaid enrollee districts. There are poor people, there are struggling people everywhere, in every district, in every state, who need Medicaid, who need Medicare, who need Social Security. And I just have to say, if Republicans are so enamored with this big, beautiful, backstabbing bill and believe it to be the manna from heaven, then don't be afraid to go into your districts and talk about the cuts. Talk about cutting Medicaid. Look at the person in the wheelchair. Look at the person who is dependent on Social Security benefits. Look at the veteran who is receiving Social Security and tell them that they don't matter. Tell them that their benefit is not as important as giving the money to Elon Musk and the billionaires. You tell them that. Because if you're not telling them to their face, you are certainly going to be telling them that when you vote for this reconciliation bill. Let's talk about education. Doge and Musk, under the authority of this administration, have already fired half of the staff in Department of Education. You know, I don't know about you, but I've got young people in my family who are excited about going to college, and they're also scared because they don't even know if the colleges are going to stay open. And I'm not just talking about elite Ivy League institutions. I'm talking about community colleges. I'm talking about state colleges. I'm talking about legacy institutions where parents and grandparents went to, and it means something to be able to get into that school and graduate. I've talked to young people who don't know if A, there will be any money for them if they get in, even with the grades. I've talked to young people who are getting ready to graduate and don't know if there will be a job for them. And I've talked to young people who were excited about representing this country and helping us be more competitive, and now don't even know if this country is for them. And newsflash, all of these young people who I've been talking to are U.S. citizens, American-born, who don't even know if there's going to be a country left, who don't even know if there will be educational institutions left, because this proposal includes $330 billion in cuts that will impact Pell Grants, Head Start, school lunches, and more. We're talking about a $1 billion freeze for school-based mental health. And I don't know about you, but it seems like every single person in this country should be accessing mental health services right now just to make it through the day. But that is what is coming out of this reconciliation package. Going back to student loan borrowers who saw a glimmer of hope last year, and now they're going to be tracked down like animals in the night when you have an administration that just accepted a $400 million bribe from another country. So the math doesn't math up. Why are you asking for young people to pay their fair share when it seems like not everyone else is doing the same thing? The regional Head Start office serving my district closed, and Head Start funding at roughly $12 billion annually represents less than 0.2% of total federal spending. Eliminating Head Start would cut child care and supportive services for about 80,000 young children in California. And then let's talk about ag. This proposal would halt funding for the Rural Energy for America program. And once again, cutting $1 billion in funding for programs that help schools and feed folks through food banks. And cutting this funding would threaten the livelihood of our American farmers and also threaten the nutrition of our children. Let's talk about our veterans. Under this reconciliation package proposal, we're talking about firing 6,000 veterans. My God, people who have served our country in wars, who have stood up for this country and the people in it, who have stood up for our Constitution, who came back from their service and were hired by the government, will be fired, have been fired, are being fired. And not only are we talking about firing 6,000 veterans, but we're also talking about cutting their services, cutting their medical services, forcing longer wait times for them, because when they call, when they go to the VA to get help, there will be fewer people there to help them. I think about the veterans in my district that I talk to, and they don't deserve to be mistreated like that. My God, they want to come back and enter into society and be part of a thriving business, to help open a business. And they still need access to their medical care. They still need access to their mental health supports. And we're going to cut that. I mean, in my mind, that's just so unchristian. And then we're talking about cutting to health and human services, so that, you know, if we're trying to make sure that folks don't get tuberculosis, that we keep measles at bay, that we keep HIV at bay, well, if you're at risk, you're going to be in greater danger, because the proposed cuts would be cutting to NIH, National Institute of Health, CDC, the Center for Disease Control, FDA, the Food and Drug Administration. So The people who make sure that the food we eat is safe, is not poisonous, won't kill us. The people who make sure that we get accurate, nonpartisan, truthful information about the diseases and the ailments that are out here in this world so that we have the information that we need to keep ourselves and our children safe and healthy, we are not going to have access to that. The research that is being done to help us fight against cancer and to cure so many other diseases that are out there, those research programs are going to be compromised. The clinical trials that are happening are going to be compromised because we have decided this reconciliation package, which is a statement of values, is going to be deciding that those things are not important. It is not important to eat healthy food. It is not important to have access to medicine. It is not important to research to find cures for diseases and illnesses that have plagued our grandparents, our parents. Have you gone to a children's hospital? Have you visited a child who is dying from cancer? Would you go to that child and tell them higher probability that you're going to die because we're cutting the grants that would allow us to find a cure? That's what is in this reconciliation package. And then Social Security, cutting 7,000 employees. You cut so many employees in your thirsty quest to find ways to, fill this hole for these tax cuts for the billionaires, that you crashed the Social Security website. You've closed offices. And you've told seniors and those with disabilities to figure out a way to get yourself to one of the few offices that are still open. But you're going to have to wait in a longer line because we have fired employees and we're actually ending phone services for claims. So really, it's a very sneaky, shady way of kicking people off of the services because you're constricting the access. I don't know about you, but I don't want to see a bunch of seniors struggling in a car or trying to get on the bus to go to the Social Security office that now has shorter hours and longer lines because they're trying to get a claim that they have earned. I mean, who tells like a 75-year-old, a 68-year-old, an 80-year-old grandparent to go suck it, basically? Like, figure out how you're going to survive. But we're going to cut all of this from you. But, I still want to visit you on Easter. I don't know what people say. I don't know how the hypocrisy formula works. But I'm not down for cutting access to Social Security, cutting Social Security, hurting our seniors, because we want to give billions more, trillions more in tax cuts to millionaires. So, and then, let's not talk about, but let's talk about the arts and cutting funding for the arts, closing down, museums and grant programs and after-school programs that teach young people how to play music, how to play an instrument, shutting down libraries. It's so healing. We turn on the radio, we want to go to a concert, we go to an art performance because that is meaningful, regardless of your political party. Everyone deserves an opportunity to enjoy art, to be able to go to a library and have a choice of what book you want to pick out. But you have no choice when they're all shut down. That's what's in this reconciliation package. Mr. Speaker, may I inquire about how much time is remaining?
The gentlewoman from California has 15 minutes remaining.
15 minutes? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
You're welcome.
I almost lost my train of thought, but it's come back to me because I was talking about the arts. And the gentleman from Maryland was talking about our leadership as a country and how our leadership is in question. And I would just like to add that not only is our leadership in question, but our attractiveness as a country is in question. Our competitive edge is in question. Our ability to be seen as forthright and a country of high integrity is in question. These cuts are hurting our children, they are hurting our grandparents, they are hurting our farmers, they are hurting our small businesses, they are hurting the infrastructure in our states, they are hurting our ports, they are hurting our hospitals, they are hurting our clinics, they are hurting our parks. Honestly, they are hurting our hearts. I think about that big red flag, that red, white, and blue flag, right behind the speaker's chair, and what that flag represents. Opportunity, access, honesty, integrity. And what we have seen last week and what we are seeing this week from a House majority when it comes to this reconciliation bill is silence, is silence. It is silence on these issues that mean so much to the people in our communities. I can't tell you how many times I have walked down the street and have had an older person grab me and say, "What's going to happen to my Social Security?" Coming here to vote and having a Capitol Police officer pull me to the side and ask me what it meant for his job, if he would have a job. Going to talk to farmers and having them tell me they may have to fire or lay off the rest of their employees, that they would not be able to make it. Small businesses in the community that are hiring other people from the community, concerned. And everyone asks, what are Republicans doing? Why aren't they standing up for us too? And I don't have an answer to that question. I want an answer to that question. Because when you're silent, it means you're complicit or you're apathetic. And I would hope that there would be no one here who would want to be complicit in the taking away of Social Security or Medicaid or Medicare. I would hope that no one here would want to be complicit in having young children with cancer at a children's hospital die because we've cut cancer research funding. As I say this, I think about my mother, a breast cancer survivor, who wonders every day if it will come back. And boy, how do you think it gets me right in the craw to have to tell her that this country doesn't care if she lives or dies, because it doesn't care enough about finding a cure for cancer to continue to fund that kind of research. And we just celebrated Mother's Day. I wonder if people shared with their mothers how all of the supports that help mothers will now be on the chopping block. So I'm sharing all of this on behalf of the Congressional Black Caucus, because as we wait to see what comes out of the remaining committees that are meeting, just know that there is a $290 billion cut to the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. So cutting off food assistance to thousands of families who need it. Just know that in these committees, they will be debating raising the age for mandatory work requirements, because we want people to work longer and work harder and get less, while somehow billionaires make more off of the backs of these working families. Just know that in these committees, they are going to be talking about cutting access to school lunches. And so many of us live in districts where the school district is actually responsible for feeding the children in the community because of the free lunch program. So I know that people might be distracted by the Qatar gift, the $400 million flying palace. Let's hope there are no bugs in it. I don't know. I know people want to be distracted by all of the other things that seem to be coming out of the administration, but I don't want us to be distracted by that. I want us to be talking about this reconciliation bill. I want us to remember what is going to be voted on in this package. And it's a thing, you know, it's a thing that it's actually taking so long for this package to arrive on the floor. And do you know why it's a thing? Because we have a House majority trying to wiggle through the truth and figure out a way to spin death and destruction and poverty. There's no way to spin kicking Granny off Social Security. There is no way to spin shutting down hospitals and clinics. And we can demonize the folks who are on Medicaid and Medicare, but I want to also remind us that if there is a doctor, if there is a clinic, if there is a hospital that is receiving a reimbursement for taking care of a recipient on Medicaid, that doctor, that hospital, that community clinic is open to serve you too, because that reimbursement allows that clinic, that doctor, that hospital to stay open to help and serve everyone else in the community. A lot of this rhetoric that you're hearing from people who don't want to talk about this reconciliation bill is trying to divide us into us and them buckets. But the truth is, we are all in this together. We are all in this country together. We are all in this debate together. We are all in this fight together to make sure that the people in our district have access to the services that they deserve. And if you are not willing to stand up for Medicare, and don't sign no letter and then run and don't show up in a district, stand up and talk about saving it, protecting it, defending it, making it better so that it can serve more people who deserve it, rather than cutting it and lying about it and running from the truth. And the truth is, this reconciliation bill, this package is going to hurt people. It's going to impoverish people. It's going to destroy businesses. Because the funny thing about economies is that they are circular. Nothing happens in a silo, in a vacuum. Businesses stay open because people are able to go into those businesses and they're able to shop and buy things. And when that happens, that business is able to grow and they're able to hire more workers. And then those workers are able to do more or produce more. You see, that's how it works. But when you cut off opportunity, access, incentive, support, then you compromise that ecosystem. And we all have those micro ecosystems in our communities. That is what makes this country strong. That's what makes this country unique. That's what makes this country worthy of this kind of debate. So, Mr. Speaker, I am going to close right now because I know the witching hour is among us. I am grateful for the time that has been given to the Congressional Black Caucus. You have heard, Mr. Speaker, from my distinguished colleagues about this reconciliation package, about all issues of great importance to this caucus, to our constituents, to the Congress, and to all Americans tonight. This reconciliation bill, it is a big deal, it is an important deal, and it should be talked about and discussed, and the best disinfectant is sunlight. And we have got to stop allowing people to be so shady about what is happening in these committees and what is being cut. We have to turn all the lights on and talk about all the cuts that are coming in this reconciliation package. And yes, we got to point the fingers and point the blame at the people who plan to make these cuts and kill the American people. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
The gentlelady yields.